Assemble here. You there. Quit messing around and get your shit together. Dresden set his assigned pile of supplies together. With a determined grunt, he started trying to figure it all out. The rookie was trying hard to remember what to do with it all. He had one reason to be thankful. The camp boss was yelling at everyone, not just him. Up the road, a gong sounded. 10 minutes. Hurry up. Hello and welcome to Moldav. Thought we'd jump right in there, set the mood. My name is Lewis Nichols. I'm your guide on this adventure. You are listening to Dresden's Tale. This is episode 3. It's chapter 2 in the book. It's the first day of Ursa, 2051 years after the fall. And we are joining Dresden Fane as he starts his life of adventure. Last episode, he was getting ready for it. He was trying to make it through a sleepless night, keep himself psyched out, try to get a little rest, because this is his big day. And as you can tell from the chaos, it's a big day for a lot of people. Now we have Dresden slipping on his boots. He slings 3 pouches onto a belt, buckles it up. All around him, his fellows from the militia of Biona are milling around. The High Warden Irving lives there, a warrior yelled, pointing at the nearby home. Dresden moved so he wasn't in the hero's front yard. The Einfahr River was 20 feet away, and its falls were less than 50 feet. He could hardly hear himself think from the raging of the river and the waterfall. The manor houses here looked over the city. That was the appeal, but Dresden wondered how the residents could stand the constant roar of the falling river. The camp boss was still yelling at him. If you can't survive equipping yourself, then you won't survive combat. The man's voice was a bellow. Not even the falls could drown him out. Dresden thought he ought to be snapping a whip instead of yelling. It would have been less painful. Most of his friends seemed more interested in gawking and chattering than getting prepared. Some had just wrapped everything up in blankets and thrown bundles over their shoulders. That's not a bad idea, he admitted to himself. Dresden yowled at a stabbing pain in his tailbone. Somebody had kicked him from behind. Fane, quit dawdling. It was Drovmoiden, the head of Nanok's guard, come to see him off. This goes here, that there, he mumbled as he tried to help Dresden organize his equipment. There, you're done. One rule, dwarf, don't embarrass the master. Now I've got more important things to do than to babysit you. As the Minotaur stalked away, Dresden never felt more out of control of his own life as he did right then. Taking a deep breath, he tried to relax. He was perspiring badly, partially from the heat, partially from nerves, partially from scrambling around. Dresden felt like he could cook an egg on his forehead. The first day of summer was starting out with a vengeance. Moldav seasons were orderly. Ebba was spring, and it had been one of ups and downs. Only a week ago it was cold enough to give him the shivers. Now he felt like he was melting. The temperatures would fluctuate between hot and oppressively hot until fall. Eckerd's month would see temperatures jump around again, but generally trend downwards before Simone and the beginning of winter. As the gong sounded again, he looked up into the sky, hoping for some relief, but there wasn't a cloud in the sky. The yellow-orange sun beat down on him. It was more or less straight above him, his shadow extending only a few feet to the east. While receiving supplies that morning at the temple, he watched it spin into daylight, a process only taking a few minutes. It was locked there now, waking up in the same spot every summer's day and fading out at night. Not until fall would it begin shifting to its winter location, a scant 20 degrees above the horizon. He'd heard it was different on Odessa, but he couldn't imagine how. In line, now. If you haven't packed it, you're shit out of luck. It was a new voice. Larafin, their Tagara captain, had arrived. If you hold up gate traffic, I will beat you like your father should have, the cat-like warrior threatened. Dresden got into line near the bridge over the falls. He looked out over the city of Parnsilia. It was his home. the place he was raised, capital of the Stone Clan, the city of gates. Just in case he never came home, he wanted the memory. He soaked in the serenity of the bay. Above it, to his left, were the Trojan mountains and the great monuments his clan had carved into them. Closer, up the road he traveled, was the great temple of Og's, god of the dead. But they weren't going that far. He watched as a small wagon loaded with chunks of Odessan marble come out of the stone structure built into the side of the stony grade. It was hard to imagine that just a few 100 feet away was a passage to places so far away. He was excited. True, lots of people traveled the gates. For some, it was a regular occurrence, as just like a trip to the market. But for him, it was an adventure. Escorting a caravan all the way to Orlok's Cove was far better duty than standing watch on a guard tower. Move out! The gate was heavily guarded, as was its mirror on the other side. A great deal of the clan's wealth was invested in that defense. Watching 3 water giant guards, he realized they were a tiny fraction of the force on duty. He shuddered to think what it would take to launch a serious attack. Dresden struggled to find his cadence. "Shit, this is really happening," one of his mates said. "I've heard it feels like falling," someone else stated. "Quiet in the line," Larafin ordered. Dresden was moving at a jog now. Even on a slow day, the gates saw heavy traffic, and there was no time for sightseeing. New arrivals milled about, while those in authority ushered them away from the area. Some needed directions, but most had made the trip many times and paused just long enough to ensure their companions were still with them. He entered the shade of the worked stone overhang leading deep into the supernatural cavern. Cool air poured over him like a welcoming mountain river. The corridor of dark, rough stone varied in width and height, never exceeding 10 feet in either dimension. Outcroppings had been broken away to accommodate travel, and the floor pounded smooth from traffic. To his left and right, warriors and other guards stood watchful. Most were humans, Tagara, and Minotaur, the usual mix of socialized species, the so-called noble races. A few were eternally watchful undead, maintained by the Church of Og's, or bound demons assigned from the temples of Abergrayon. In places, the sentient pairs of eyes were supplemented by carved visages in the stone itself. Perhaps they were possessed by elementals, or maybe they would just serve to intimidate. It was the longest 30 feet Dresden had ever faced. He began to notice flakes of light in the walls. Darkness turned to a dull glow. The guards were gone, but he couldn't pause. So crowded was the hall, he couldn't even dodge a pile of offal some beast of burden had left behind. Luminescence blurred the lines between wall and floor. He fought off a dizzy spell and kept moving. Dresden was certain anyone tripping would be trampled over, just like a pile now smeared on his new boot. At a 4-way intersection, they were directed right. "Keep moving," something not entirely alive bellowed at them. At a jog, he did what he was told, bumping into the man in front of him while being pushed from behind. 20 paces later, Dresden felt like he'd been thrown into a cook fire. Devastating heat sucked the air right out of him. As searing light blinded him, the Odessan sun blasted down with a white violence, making him squirm inside his leathers. "Move! You all call yourselves warriors? Get your asses going!" He wasn't sure who was screaming at him now, but Dresden knew he had to keep hustling. Stumbling forward, he remembered to breathe in through his nose rather than his mouth. The dryness would cause bleeding no matter what one did, but it was better to bleed through the nose than the lungs. As his sight began to adjust, Dresden could make out the crowds. Everyone tried to make their way under the high walls. Throngs of travelers, all organized by yelling men and women, a model of Keld efficiency. There were 6 gates in the Odessan nexus, each invisible. Without the lines placed there, you would never know they existed. It was just a patch of land, barely an acre, surrounded by man's defenses, except for those invisible passageways to other planes. As he passed out of the curtain wall, Dresden could see a line of wagons crossing over. They just seemed to disappear into thin air. By the end of the day, he was beginning to wish he was guarding someone else's horses under Moldav's gentle sun. One mystery was solved. The unnatural sun here moved across the sky. When it hit the horizon, he expected something dramatic, but it just slipped from view. As an answer often does, the revelation only created more mysteries. No one completely understood the astronomy of the plane, but his mates believed the glowing ball traveled through some underground conduit that would carry it to the other side of the plane, from which it would rise the next morning. And there you have it. That is Chapter 2 complete. I hope you enjoyed the faster pace. I tried to write it with the urgency of a combat scene where Dresden was being rushed and pressured, and there were some stakes on the line to keep him moving. What would happen if he fell behind, or what was he getting himself into? We're gonna be on Odessa for a few chapters. This is where he starts to make a few adult friends, so to speak. This is where he starts to, spread his wings as a Keld warrior. There will probably even be a little fighting along the way. Maybe some monsters, maybe some bandits. Who knows? It'll definitely be interesting. So I want to thank you all very much for coming by. We threw a lot of stuff out at you today. Don't forget there's a complimentary series on my YouTube channel here called Nuts and Bolts. We'll talk a little bit more about astronomy and some of the geography of Parnsilia and the history of the Stone Clan and that kind of stuff. Things that we don't want to delve too deeply as we try to stick to the story here. I appreciate you coming by. You could have been doing anything, but I'd also appreciate if you could do all the stuff. Hit the like button, subscribe, come visit me on Twitter. There's Patreon, and remember, this is also a book. It's not in a paper format, but you can definitely go by Amazon, download it for your Kindle or whatever reading device you might have. So I want to wish you all a very happy day, and we will see you next time.